at an auction in the 1890s. In fact, the catalogue had been bought by Olive from a Bristol art dealer for just £18 a few years previously.
We were creating this assessment in the light of having been given what appeared to be a cast iron provenance, which had already been assessed by Bolton Museum and accepted. And therefore, it seemed that this thing was coming with a good pedigree, and so I proceeded to make the heritage assessment of it.
The piece is a magnificent example of a small class of remarkable sculptures of the period. The worn surfaces of the breaks indicate that they were made long ago, almost certainly in antiquity as a result of the iconoclasm affecting Armagh monuments. So everything about the advice that we were getting from the professional services of the British Museum suggested to us that this was all right and that there was no real doubt in anyone's mind about its genuineness.
If something comes to you and it looks reasonable, and also you have been told that this has a good provenance because it's been in Britain since 1892, then you assess it within the framework of the information you've been given. I don't know that it's down to us to contact Bolton and say, oh, did you really research the provenance properly? Because they should do their job. They are acquiring the piece.
Christie's obviously felt enough people had vouched for it, or for them to put a high value on it. It was declared a preeminent object, so obviously people felt comfortable with it as well. And all the funders, particularly the major funders, they would have, they obviously felt comfortable with the picture as well. So it's a great thing, hindsight. There are things you may think, well, if only we looked at that, we should have checked that more closely. But all of the information we had was very strongly suggesting this was a genuine item with a proper history and was something we should acquire.
Including the princess, the fakes had made the Greenhalghs over £800,000. But unlike most criminals, they don't appear to have been driven by money.
I think it was possibly summed up by George at one point when I asked why he hadn't spent some of the money, and he turned around to me and said, well, he said, in that drawer there, he said, I've got 6 pairs of socks I've never worn. What else do I need? And that was the way they lived. They lived their life as if they didn't have this money, and they had enough to eat, and they had enough to drink, and they had a house with a roof over their head, and what else did they need?
Their reasons for making the fakes lay further back in time and appear rooted in the Greenhalghs' bizarre personalities. In his younger years, George was a character in the local pubs and had a reputation for telling fantastical stories.
I always remember him with a lightish-coloured mac on, and he were having a drink. And he pulled these little stones out of his pocket, and he were fingering them. And I said, what are them? He said they're Stone Age arrowheads. He was going to the museum in Manchester, actually. He said, I flog them. He said, I go and find them. He says, and I take them and they'll pay me for them. When I started to think about it, I thought, there's no bloody flint round here at all. I've never known any flint.
It seems George had been conning the experts as far back as the 60s. Then he discovered the remarkable talents of his youngest son, Sean. Together, they retreated into the family home, becoming virtual recluses for the next 30 years.
We moved in next door to him in 1967. I more or less saw Sean every day. But when we left in 74, as for in the next 25 years, I think I only saw him 3 or 4 times. I don't think he ever went out. He certainly weren't one for local pubs round here. Well, I wouldn't describe him as a mummy's boy, but he's always lived at home. I don't know if he's ever worked. I don't only guess, but his home environment, I think, is the only environment he's ever known.
I think the reason I've done it, it's my lifestyle. I have no friends. I never go out to bother anybody. It's just I find people difficult to deal with.
Sean had tried to become a painter when he was in his 20s. It appears that after that, his whole life became devoted to making the forgeries.
I've tried for years to make my way in my own name. Nobody were interested. If it was ancient or it had a name on it, they were all eyes and ears.
He started to suggest at the very least that he did it because he could, because he was an artist who had been rejected, and because he had a hatred of money, the art market, and possibly anyone from the south of England as well. He felt that he had been rejected because he was from Bolton, and that he would never become a recognised artist, and he'd never get a job in the art trade because he was from Bolton.
Sean's had his revenge, but as his trial approached, more revelations would come, putting a last sting in the tail of the family's remarkable story.
Are his paintings any good? I mean, do the experts say that the paintings are... I mean, here I am asking you about experts when they're just bamboozled the whole bloody lot of them, haven't they? I mean, it's brilliant, really, isn't it?
When the Greenhalghs were brought to trial, it was the end of a 17-year run that had seen them take in some of the world's top art dealers, auction houses, and museums. At the last minute, Sean's parents, who'd always denied any wrongdoing,